Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about the energy future and how the oil and gas industry will lead. I'm Tisha Schuller, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. I'm doing something different today. I'm working through some ideas that I will be writing about in upcoming Both of These Things Are True episodes. All of this is in service to the book I'm writing about the moment where forces are laying bare that the energy transition is going to be complex. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things to think and talk about. So I hope you enjoy today's solo podcast with me, myself, and I. Hello, listeners. I'm really excited for today's episode. I have a couple of ideas I'm working on writing about, and I want to run them by you. But first, a couple housekeeping items. I'm recording this during the week of Thanksgiving, which you'll hear this after. And the Schuller clan, every year we host at our house a huge costume-themed party, and this year's disco. So I have an extra spring in my step doing all the planning for this. Of course, you have to listen to your disco playlist. And so if you usually listen to your podcast on 1.5 speed, you might have to slow it down because I've got a lot of energy for the work and for life right now. And another housekeeping item is I just want to have a shout out to Roger Pielke. He mentioned Both of These Things Are True, my weekly newsletter, and his Honest Broker Substack this week. And I really appreciate it because I have so much deep respect for his work. So if you haven't checked out the Honest Broker on Substack, I strongly recommend that you do. Today, I want to talk through two big ideas with you and their implication. The first one is, while everyone is reflecting on the year end and how much everything has changed, I want to talk about what hasn't changed in the context of the moment. That's the first thing. And the second thing I want to talk about is what we as the oil and gas industry can learn from where woke went wrong. And then what does that mean? What does that mean for us and the work ahead? That's what we'll cover today. So let's jump in there, and you'll see more about this. If you find these topics interesting, you'll see more about this in upcoming Both of These Things Are True newsletters that I'm working on. You can send me your thoughts, and I'll incorporate and upgrade my thinking with your reactions. So first, let's explore what hasn't changed. So 4 key ideas here. So in the context of the moment, we're really thinking about public interest and opinion around energy and climate and the trajectory of decarbonization. And I think there's a number of things that in the wake of the election and in the wake of COP, we can talk about things that have changed, but some things that haven't. One is that no matter what, over the course of decades and years, energy will evolve, and how people want to consume energy will evolve. So this is really important when we think about our role as oil and gas companies and providers of fuels and feedstocks, is that innovation and ever evolving sources of energy that are cleaner and more dense and have a smaller footprint. This is just the trajectory of energy transitions over time. And so there's never going to be a moment where we're going to freeze and we're going to just have oil and gas forever as it is. So we want to continue to think about the evolution of the energy systems and the evolution of our companies in leading the way. So that's one thing that has not changed. The second thing that hasn't changed is that climate is going to be a topic of interest. A whole bunch of people still put climate as their number one issue. And if they don't put it on there as their number one issue, climate and effects of climate change are going to continue to be a meaningful risk to be considered, to be mitigated, to be incorporated into business considerations. And so there's no world where we're done talking about climate change and decarbonization and the role that oil and gas adjacent decarbonization solutions play in the future. And we continue to have this demographic evolution where the millennials will dominate the population in round numbers. And that is just a cohort that climate change has always been central to them. And now, when you combine millennials and Gen Z, which are our youngest employees and the age of my kids, for example, climate change is just going to be a central issue. So that hasn't changed. A third thing that hasn't changed is there is just, I think, an unstoppable momentum about diversifying and expanding energy options. So we're not going to have fewer considerations in all of the above energy strategies. We're going to have more. So yes, we'll have oil and gas, but in this context of energy addition, which I wrote about in a recent, both of these things are true. The world requires more energy. The world's going to require more solutions. And that momentum for diversification, for innovation, that has not changed either. And the last thing that I think hasn't changed is that the future belongs to leaders and innovators. You would be hard pressed to identify times when the people who are fighting for the status quo, are fighting for freezing solutions, are going to be the ultimate winners. So ultimately, for each of us thinking about our role in the present and the future, we want to think about in what ways we can provide solutions, be leaders, be innovating, be casting a vision for a future that is better. There are 4 things, and I think they're pretty humongous, that haven't changed. The energy system and set of solutions will continue to evolve. That climate and decarbonization will be central topics around the energy future. That we will continue to see more types of energy innovation and solutions, and that the future belongs to leaders and innovators and people who cast a vision that is compelling. So that's what I think hasn't changed. So that leads us to what I think we, as oil and gas industry leaders and supporters, need to learn from where woke went wrong. So it's awfully fashionable right now to look at critiques of where maybe the progressive left or just the political left in the US in general overplayed their hand. And I think there's a real danger that supporters of the oil and gas industry do the same right now. So let's look at that. And let's see if we can connect the dots and then learn from that. So I have 3 things I'm thinking about here. And I imagine there may be more. So listeners, as you're digesting this, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. But one thing, and I'm just going to speak generically, not just about energy and climate, although I think these do apply and maybe it's worth exploring a little bit. But one way that woke went wrong is whatever the issue was, defund the police, addressing climate, you pick it, the solution was oversimplified, right? There's a simple narrative. The world is complex and solutions are complex, and oversimplification is tempting. It's very tempting. And so that's one way that I think, particularly in the context of energy and climate, all of you are super familiar with this idea that like the solution is renewables. And anyone who knows anything about the energy system knows that that just addressing power with intermittent solutions alone is kind of silly. And so I think this idea of having a simple narrative was a real fundamental flaw. A second way I think woke went wrong is in moralizing about everything. So pick any of those topics again. We are particularly familiar with the idea of energy and climate. And what I mean by moralizing is this sort of anthropomorphizing of energy, like coal is bad, coal is evil, wind is good and virtuous. And of course, these are just inanimate objects that we put to use for our societal purposes, and they are neither inherently good nor evil. And yet that veil ended up taking on a religious-like connotation, right? Where Certain clean tech is good. You could see it in the way young people were trying to identify their careers. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And in that context, of course, we all became quite familiar with being on the receiving end of bad. So, like, we don't want oil and gas companies at the table. Oil and gas companies caused this problem. That sort of moralizing where you have a villain, which I guess means you also have a victim. And then you have these sort of like virtuous solutions. That moralizing into good and bad, one, it reinforces the simplicity, point one. And two, it's not how the world works, right? And we all know, and I think many of us, if you like I have been on the receiving end of, we don't want you or your solutions at the table. It's alienating, right? It's frustrating. It makes us as individuals and as a collective get combative ourselves about these things. And so that second thing, I think, of moralizing whatever the topic was, made a whole bunch of people feel like they were the villain. So when you feel like the villain, you reject the narrative, you reject the paradigm. And then the third one, and I'm still getting my head wrapped around this, is that in many contexts, something that seemed like the logical next step, let's just say SEC requirement for climate disclosures. Okay, there's a logical next step. If companies are going to be doing climate disclosures, they should do so in a way that they are held accountable for those climate disclosures being accurate. Something that's like seems logical. Companies should set net zero targets. So it sort of seems like a logical next step. What we observe time and time again is that there was always a next step, right? A next step, a next step, a next step. And at some point, the next step becomes a bridge too far. And that is really important for us to understand, because things that seem sensical, pragmatic, balanced, moderate, middle of the road, you can do a lot of things. And then all of a sudden, there's the one too many things. And then it becomes a bridge too far. And people reject not just the one baby next step, they reject the whole narrative, the whole principle. They reject the idea. And we see this across the board in how many people are talking and thinking about net zero targets, for example, which I think started out and continue to be a very reasonable way of casting a vision, a very reasonable way of articulating shared aspirations, of inspiring innovation, of inspiring solutions. And then you do something like Canada did, where you're going to punish companies for quote unquote greenwashing by articulating what they're doing or what they want to do. And it just becomes absurd. And then the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. So those are the three things. So let me just reiterate where I think woke went wrong. And then let's talk a little bit about why I think some industry supporters are at risk of doing the same thing. So one, oversimple narrative. Two, moralizing into good guys and bad guys, good solutions and bad solutions. And three, taking what is a pragmatic next step, but then never stopping until ultimately you've gone too far. So let's look at this moment. One simple narrative. You could imagine, and I'm not saying you, listener, would do this, but you could imagine that there are oil and gas supporters that would say, we won, full stop. The people have spoken. There was an overwhelming election, whatever, trend. You could look at polls about where people rank climate as a priority or energy transition regulation. And you could say, like, that's it. It's over. And that would be, okay, just super dumb. Let's not do that. Let's not do the same thing. Let's not articulate energy evolution, energy future, energy solutions in some oversimplified way. Let's embrace the nuance, the complexity, the miraculous innovation underway, the extraordinary opportunities for leadership to increase our efficiency, to reduce our emissions, to contribute innovations that will transform the emissions or energy landscape. So let's not do the simple narrative thing. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is moralizing. So, to the extent I get trolled in my work, it has that moralizing nature, which is, I find ironic, right? Like the idea that fossil fuels good, wind bad. Okay, that is so silly. They're still inanimate objects. They are still things we put to use for our purposes. And it's good I didn't have a third cup of coffee this morning because I could just lose my mind about how silly it is when we do exactly what critics of the oil and gas industry do, but in reverse. It's the dumbest thing ever. We are scientists and engineers. We know better. The energy system is here to serve humanity. It is here to serve society. And should we continue to let it evolve, make it better, look for the best solutions? Of course we should. There's not like some frozen in time good guy that happens to be an oilman or something. Like that is just the dumbest thing. Okay, we're going to move on before I lose my mind. Okay, so moralizing. Let's not do it. It's silly. And we're scientists and engineers. We know better. Okay. Third, the next step becomes a bridge too far. So what could that look like? Well, there could be some pretty reasonable political stances, like let's make emissions regulations work, but let's embrace emissions, reducing emissions regulations, right? We could continue to support net zero aspirations, net zero goals, net zero plans, decarbonization solutions. We could want to see things that work in this way. Where I think industry supporters could go too far is to keep going, right? Keep going. No decarbonization solutions, no regulation. Maybe companies shouldn't be participating at all in clean tech or decarbonization innovation. You can see pretty easily how industry supporters could just go too far. And then I don't need to tell you, right, that in a future Democratic administration, the response would be, we knew it. We knew it. We knew you weren't leaders. We knew you were innovators. We knew you were just fighting for the past. So let's make sure that our next steps are reasonable and they stop with the long-term vision of the future. It's just, I think, common sense. Let's not lose our minds and let's not overplay our hand. Never mind that I think that would be foolish for just generically as entrepreneurs and leaders, but also even if you just wanted to have a calculated risk mitigation path forward, you would want to cast a path that's the middle way, right? That is enduring. All right. So what should we do with these two things? So I talked a little bit about, I'm sort of testing out these ideas with you of what has to change. I'm testing out these ideas with you of what can we learn from where woke went wrong. I sort of have some first thoughts on what does this mean for us as industry leaders. The first is let's just remember that all of us, I think all humans in America, North America, to my Canadian compatriots, no one likes polarization, except maybe certain media influencers who benefit from crazy polarization, but none of us like polarization. The number one thing we can do to combat that is remember what other people that we care about, remember what the world looks like to them. And remember that a whole bunch of America, depending on where you sit, somewhere between 45 to 55% of America thinks about energy and climate really, really, really differently from you, but probably 95% the same as you. But that 5% can get really outsized. And so we want to remember and not think that there's one way of looking at the world and it happens to be the way we are. And then through that, I think the second thing is we can cultivate a kind of moderation, a kind of bringing down the polarization temperature. I believe deeply that as citizens, we need to keep our wits about us and create self-fulfilling prophecies where our institutions are strong, where our companies are worthy of the kind of influence they have, where we as leaders rise to the occasion of both the problems and the opportunities ahead of us. And so we as individuals, as leaders, we need to cultivate the kind of moderate spirit that will create a less polarized world. And I mean, if not us, who? Like, who's going to do it if it's not us? And I know, I get accused of being like sort of a Pollyanna all the time, but I think I'm right. So I don't care. All right. And the third thing is, let's embrace complexity. Complexity of the present day politics, complexity of the present day energy system, complexity of the realm of solutions. And I think anytime we find ourselves talking about things in black or white terms and oversimplified terms, we could just take a beat, take a pause, and know we're just playing into the nonsense, right? We're just playing into our own version of where woke went wrong. So anytime you catch yourself thinking, talking, engaging, acting in sort of black and white ways around energy, around climate, around politics, around the future, take a little looky and see, am I part of the solution or part of the problem in this context? And I think embracing complexity is a big part of that. And then, of course, I love the people of this industry. And I know you to be thoughtful and to be kind and to be a part of a group of people who have created the last 150 years of the energy system and can create the next 150 years. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what we can do here. There is certainly a new flavor to the moment where our industry can lead in crafting both civic solutions and energy solutions going forward. So I encourage you to do so. Thanks for listening. That was our episode for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to this solo version of Energy Thinks. You may notice if you're the video type that I recorded this audio only. I'll be curious if you think video matters, if you just want to see me talking to myself on the screen, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to do solo podcasts audio only because then I can wear my cozy adamantine hoodie and record it on the weekend when my mind is expansive. I'll be curious to hear what you think about that. I would love it and be super grateful if you would take a moment and rate this podcast so others in the oil and gas industry can find us. If you'd like to know more about our work at Adamantine or sign up for my newsletter, both of these things are true. You can check that out at energythinks.com. I want to thank my colleague Kayla Chieves for making All Things Podcast possible. And we're in the midst of the holiday season. I hope you're taking care of yourself and your family. And I wish you happiness, prosperity, and good health.